welcome to the Emagia AI for Finance podcast. I am Brian Chappelle, your host for today. We're very excited to have Renil Da Silva from CARE. He is the Chief Financial and Operating Officer with the group. He also has a host of experience as a finance manager, group financial accounting manager, lots of nonprofit experience, and of course, CARE is has 900 million dollar portfolio and operations across 50 countries. They are a leading humanitarian and development agency, and we are very excited to have you here today to share your experiences with autonomous finance solutions and agentic AI and everything else that's coming along technologically to sort of help in the order to cash world and beyond. So, thank you for joining us. Let's just jump right in and hear a little bit about your journey and how these technological advances are, coming into your world or have come into your world, and what you're interested in that regard.
Great. Hi, Brian. Great to see you and great to join this podcast. I'll just talk a little bit about my career background. I've got a bit of an unusual one because I started off my career back in Melbourne, Australia, in public practice in accounting. I'm a qualified accountant, who then eventually moved into investment and asset management area for about 9 years or so. And after about 15 years of corporate, doing various finance and operational leadership roles, I had a bit of a change of heart and decided to join a sector that is actually focused on humanitarian and development, which I thought was an interesting change in my career at that point in time. So then I joined Save the Children Australia back in Melbourne as a deputy CFO. And then I had the opportunity to move across the world doing various roles. So I had the opportunity to run operations in East and Southern Africa, looking after 15 countries based in Nairobi, and then eventually running operations and finance in global operations based in the United Kingdom, and then also eventually finishing up at Save the Children as the CFO for Save the Children Norway. And then I got a call out of the blue and moved to the US. Now I work for an organization called CARE. We've been around for about 80 years. As you mentioned, we're about $1 billion organization. I look after all finance and operational activities across globally. So very excited to join you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for sharing all that. So I guess let's dig deep into the content right away. I hear a lot of people talking about how AI is redefining finance. And people throw around a lot of words and a lot of buzzwords and a lot of claims. How about we dig into what it's really doing and get beyond the hype? What do you see as what it's doing? More volatile industries or ever changing, AR or order to cash conditions or things like reporting. Can you talk a little bit about what you actually see it as, what redefining means?
Yeah, that's an interesting question around AI is the buzzword at the moment, and I totally agree with you. But also, AI is probably the shiny object of a broader digital revolution that's happening across globally. Right? When you think about AI is not new, right? It's becoming quite a bit of a hype because of what's coming up in the marketplace, especially in the last 12 months. But generally speaking, digital and technology and data is actually having a huge impact in all sectors, especially in the finance space. I think we see a lot of autonomous financing, but also the key thing for us has been, as an organization, how it's impacting not only finance, but also it's impacting the operational and the supply chain space. So when we think about AI capabilities, we are looking at functions not only in finance, but in digital marketing space. We are looking at functions in the fundraising space. We are looking at functions in the programmatic space, all using AI capabilities in our organization. In fact, actually, we have a bit of a culture change drive when it comes to AI. We did a survey not long ago at CARE. About 95% of people who responded to the survey, we are about a 7,000 population organization, said they use AI on their day-to-day activities to improve productivity and efficiency across the board. So AI is actually making a huge impact across our organization. But when you think about autonomous finance, and especially on source to pay side of things, it's making significant impacts on increasing efficiency, looking at data, and predictive analytics for our decision making has been quite critical.
Okay, so obviously, supply chain matters are of critical importance to you. Specifically things like agentic AI, autonomous finance, generative AI. How important are they for sort of the present and future of the supply chain, and in what kind of ways and in what kind of uses would you really kind of point to?
Yeah, so when you think about supply chain, it's AI and technology is actually impacting the industry in many different ways. Not only moving away from a manual logistics and operations. So if you think about when you think about shipping and logistics and transportation, there's a lot of planning that happens when it comes to using AI and planning capabilities. So for us as an organization, we are moving into a new supply chain platform that is kind of AI enabled. So instead of us building, AI capabilities and, building agents ourselves, what we've done is we've actually gone into the marketplace and bought platforms that has AI capabilities, right? So we see a significant efficiency improvement and also cost savings. There's two things that happens from an AI perspective. It is helping us to do predictive analytics around key areas around where the humanitarian needs are. Whether it's actually climate change issues, whether it's geopolitical issues, we've got to be able to analyze and do predictive analytics around situations. And based on that, we can do our sourcing planning. For example, if we need to think about stocking up certain set of goods and services in a certain country, in a certain location, we can use predictive analytics to really do our planning, but also making sure that our operations are navigated through a strong AI-generated planning process, right? And then you have the payments and the invoicing piece, which is kind of automated most of the time these days. So if you think about, we have a large shared services center in the Philippines. We had a lot of manual processing, a lot of staff doing a lot of processing work. Now it's actually transitioning into automated invoicing and transactional generation. So AI is making a huge impact in the supply chain space at the moment.
Now, from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, but supply chain management has a lot of operators, a lot of people in the industry that are sort of into, old school sort of ways and traditional ways of doing anything, which generally means manual tasks, and people may have thought they were quite good at those. That said, there are others who kind of dip their toes in the water with automation and did a little bit of that. This is several steps, to go with agentic AI and autonomous finance solutions. This is several more steps down the line. So, what is sort of the um, level of obstacles for people to adopt right now, and maybe what's the argument to get them from mild automation and mostly manual processes into this new world? How is the convincing of them working?
Yeah, so I look at this in three steps. I think we have to really think about the data in that space. I think moving away, I don't think we should call it old school. I think we get into trouble by calling it old school supply chain. But the reality is, we've had to do the changes from doing a lot of manual paperwork, a lot of documentation, a lot of filing, to transitioning most of our data into areas where it's actually readily available, right? So the first challenge I see is around the transition has been quite an important step, getting the data right in every organization, right? We can't talk about autonomous finance, we can't talk about AI if you don't have the basics or fundamentals of getting the data right. So that's one area that a lot of the organizations are focusing on, getting your data right so that we can do all the AI generated automated activities through having good, strong data. The second thing is around the people side of things. So it's a total different outlook when it comes to supply chain looking ahead, right? So we need different sets of skills. We don't need people who can actually now stack boxes, do manual entry into a system. Most of that stuff can be done through robotics. Most of the stuff can be automated from invoicing all the way from sourcing to payments. So we need a different set of supply chain and finance leaders who can have different set of capabilities to use AI and technology to enhance the efficiencies on the day-to-day activities. So that means you're looking at a workforce that is slightly different to what we had maybe even 2 years ago, right? So technology and upskilled workforce is going to be quite critical for that transformation. And then the third area is around governance. And this is a real challenge because quite often when you're using AI and data and technology, quite often we overlook the importance of governance. Someone needs to, oversight it, sign off on it, making sure that the data that it's been utilized is actually giving us the right answers, right? And making sure that the right planning is in process. So that governance is a critical part of it. So when in answering your question, the three areas I would be focusing on: getting the data right, getting the right skilled resources that we need to run operations with, and then the third area around strong governance and oversight to manage the data and the AI complexities that are creating when it comes to decision making.
Gotcha. And I'm glad you managed getting the data right side, because that's one of the things I've seen in the industry is that, a lot of people that maybe jumped into AI early without a formulated plan, or a strong roadmap, or maybe didn't get communication from maybe a vendor that they were working with, maybe had outsized uh, expectations about what was possible and what was needed on their end. And I like to talk about AI in the way of, it is not a magic bullet, it is another tool. But that tool has to be managed by humans. And those humans have to make sure that the right information is getting out there. And clean data is important, as they say in computer science: garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
If you don't have your stuff together, just hiring or building a new, great agentic AI product is still going to be using bad information to try to generate, good results, which is impossible. So I'm glad you mentioned that. But of course, working on your roadmap and being cognizant of that, I think, is somewhat self-explanatory. But you also mentioned the challenges with the workforce, and obviously the concerns of AI coming along. How do you kind of build trust and work on that stuff and do things like upskilling or reskilling? How should CFOs and finance leaders be approaching that to make sure that implementations and further use of these things is actually going as planned?
Yeah, so I would look at this in two separate lenses, and there's a governance and a board lens, and there's a team members and resources and people who are actually doing the work lens. Uh, when it comes to board and governance, I find, I'm in a couple of boards, and I also have quite a strong, large board at CARE. One of the key things is they're expecting organizations to transition into using AI very quickly, right? It's speed to market when it comes to adopting AI has been a real focus for most board members and leadership teams. So it's an important bridge to cross for us as leaders. As you rightly mentioned, garbage in, garbage out when it comes to data piece, right? Also, there's a lot of platforms that are available from an AI perspective. So we have to be extremely selective around the timing of these implementations. For example, if you don't have the fundamentals of data sorted out, moving into a new AI-focused platform is going to be quite a bit of a challenge for an organization. So really managing the expectations from board and governance and leadership level and making them understand the criticality of getting the data piece. So getting the first step right before we move into a fast adaptation of AI capabilities. That's the first lens. The second one's around the workforce has to change over the next few years. When you think about, there's quite a lot of anxiety, especially you see the news around a lot of the technology companies, a lot of supply chain companies, and a lot of organizations are releasing high volumes of staff members because they're adopting AI, right? So, and how do you make sure that you build a culture where it's okay to use technology and actually use AI capabilities to improve your work and day-to-day life and improve the efficiency of the work, but yet not have a gun to your head thinking about you're going to lose your role, right? So how do we make that transition to building a culture of reskilling, upskilling, and being able to use AI capabilities is a positive outcome than actually thinking that you're going to lose your job because AI is going to take over. End of the day, AI, as you rightly mentioned, is a tool, is a platform, and it's an opportunity to improve our efficiencies, but humans need to play a key role in that. So keeping that in mind is going to be important. But obviously, a lot of the transactional type of roles we see disappearing, especially in the finance and supply chain space, because that can be done and automated. So it's an opportunity for us to upskill and reskill our staff to being able to use technology and use AI to make their day-to-day lives a little bit easier.
Okay, so you also mentioned the governance thing, and I know a lot of people have to balance the idea of centralization versus country autonomy, for example. Um, but with CARE doing business in 50 different countries, obviously there are the obvious benefits to having more automation in that regard. That said, people want that sort of automation. People want to be able to trust this, but how do they get to the point where they trust that they're not going to run afoul with governance and run afoul with compliance? What would you say to those people that are a little bit recalcitrant to take that risk?
Yeah. I mean, this is the daily challenge. Running operations in 50 plus countries means you're dealing with different skilled labor forces. You're dealing with different requirements and regulations at the local country level. And you're also dealing with different cultural barriers to adopting AI and technology. So it's important to think about this as a three-layered cake. When you think about at the top layer, we need to think about setting up the organizational wide governance and controls that's going to be relevant and important for your organization. Even simple things like having a policy related to AI usage and being very clear on what platforms we can use and what agents we can use and what apps we can use from a technology perspective to enhance AI. And there's also enterprise level controls that needs to be put into place. For example, if you're setting up a new platform and using AI capabilities, having the right level of controls in process that can be navigated at the global level, right? So, and then the second level is where most of the communication happens, for example, and the transactional work happens. When you think about, we have a large shared services center, we need to make sure that we are using technology and AI capabilities to improve efficiency and really increase the impact per dollar. So we are using as an opportunity to use technology to reduce costs. So that means we'll probably have less people looking at transactional work, for example, automating accounts payable end to end is one of these examples. And then at the country level, that's where the entry level operations happens and where the rubber hits the road, right? We work with a lot of our programmatic staff at the country level. How do you bring them into the journey of making sure that there's a control operations of using AI to improve our programmatic aspects of it, right? So there's a lot of layers that we need to have control over, but also it's about having policies and procedures right, but also giving the staff and the teams the freedom to create with technology, to create with AI, to make things efficient, but also to be creative and innovative in the programmatic space that we are working on. So looking at those three layers is quite critical for us managing global operations.
So from a global standpoint, and you are obviously somebody who has embraced the technology and sort of make it work best for your organizations. Where do you think this is going to be going over the next couple of years to 5 years, and where would you personally like to see it going in the finance use space?
Yeah, so there's a lot of discussions about AI and its capabilities, but we still see very limited exposure and operation being operationalized at the finance level, right? There's a lot of things happening from whether it's P2P space or source to pay space, or whether it's actually automation around invoicing, but there's very limited forecasting and budgeting tools that are being developed using AI, right? If that's been developed, it comes at quite a high price. So there's a bit of a journey in the finance space that the organizations and companies will go through over the next couple of years around transitioning some of this manual work into using technology and AI to make things efficient. But at the same time, there'll be a significant shift in the investments required to improve the finance and operational functions using AI capabilities. And the other challenge we see is we have a lot of companies popping up left, right, and center having an AI related product. If you think about, if you go to a conference, you see maybe at least 100 vendors displaying their products using really marketing on AI. But can that be consolidated in a way that you see the benefits of having various vendors and platforms being kind of consolidated into where the market is actually helping us drive that, right? Because if you think about large scale ERP providers, they're bringing in all these smaller vendors and aligning with their platforms these smaller enhancements that's happening from AI space. So we see a bit of a transition over the next couple of years where smaller vendors might be or technology companies might be consolidated to deliver much more efficient product, but that's also reasonably priced. So we'll see that trends happening through in the marketplace. But also, I think I'm more worried about the workforce. We'll see a lot of entry-level finance and operational roles disappearing over a period of time because of technology and AI. And how do we get this workforce to focus on middle-level leadership roles without having the fundamentals and basics of learning something for a few years? I think you see that trend happening in the finance space. So it's a lot of interesting times, and then it's better to embrace than not embrace technology and AI.
Okay, all very interesting stuff. Um, well, any other parting shots? Anything we haven't covered that you think that people really need to take away from this conversation right now?
Yeah, so for me, think about change when it comes to what's happening in from a technology. I would recommend think big, implement small, right? That is the key thing because there's a lot of tools available. There's a lot of areas of focus when it comes to AI and automation and agentic AI capabilities. But think about what big impact you can make by changing smaller processes and systems within your organization. So think big, start small.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, thank you again for joining us. That was really informative. I'm sure our listeners are very happy with that. Of course, thank you all for joining us at home. I know you're all very busy, and that you're taking time out to continue this discussion means a lot to us and everybody involved in the industry. So until next time, I'm Brian Chappell, and thank you for joining us on the Emagia AI for Finance podcast. Take care until next time.